Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. It is the last show of the NFL season of the 2020. Thank God, the NFL 2020 season. Brad, this is it. This is our wrap-up show. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It's sad but exciting. We as you thought this season never would happen. I was more confident, but I really didn't think it would happen. I was more confident. Uh, as you know, you made it to the finals. I made it to the semifinals. We were hoping to have an all buzz final, but we did not make that happen by my last second stupid mistake, and I admit it. But but it is what it is. But I'm doing good. We're looking. I'm going to do a couple of playoff fantasy things. Nothing too crazy. Not that I have to sink my teeth in too much, but that's what I'm up to.
All right, so that's great. And, I personally don't. I'm not a big playoff fantasy guy, and we'll talk about that a little later. But what I want to tell everybody is what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to kind of go back and take a look at the season that was. Who were some of the people we predicted would be sleepers? Who were some of the people we predicted would be busts? And how did that turn out? We had some burning questions at the beginning of the season that we kind of just took a stab at. And we're going to go back and we're going to check. We might be guys that love fantasy football, but there's not a single person, no matter how much of an expert they think they are, that's 100% right. Well, I was close to 100% wrong. So it'll be interesting to go over that. And then a little later, something I want to talk about is who's going to be the number one pick next year, or even the top three picks, because I think it's become very interesting. And I'm curious to see what people out there, what they think the number one pick will be next year. And I'd also love to find out some of the people's biggest disappointments during the season. What happened? Who did they have high hopes for? And it just didn't pan out. So give us a call if you want to let us know at 772-800-BUZZ, or you can always comment in Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and we will get right with you. We will answer your questions as they come live on the air right now. But, the first thing I want to talk about is, let's talk about, you said about COVID that we weren't sure whether or not there was going to be a season, or I wasn't sure. You were a little more confident than I was. But my wife actually asked a great question at dinner tonight, and she said,
what are you doing here?
Yeah. She said, did COVID affect fantasy this year? And did it affect NFL this year? And it was a very good question because, Jonah's immediate reaction was no. And I thought, well, that's not necessarily true, because there were some times where the Dolphins, for example, because that's who I follow, had some guys on COVID the week we lost to Denver. And it's not just us. There were teams that didn't have their stars, and as a result, they didn't play their normal game.
Well, you got to get. Well, first off, Kenneth, I don't know why our number isn't working. I'm not sure. Commish, you'll check that when you can.
You could try again, Kenneth, if you would like.
But here's I know I'm getting a bad glare behind me. I don't know why. I moved in my room. I actually got a chair. As you know, I was standing all season, so I'm trying sitting tonight. But
coming in now.
Think about it. It started before the season started with it changing football. You had players opting out.
Right. That's true.
You had 7 or 8 players from the Patriots opt out. That changed things right from the very day one.
Yes.
Right? From Kansas City, running back.
Right.
Star last year, Williams.
And I know that the Dolphins, Albert Wilson. I mean, boy, we could have used him this year.
So that question is a 100% yes. From day one, COVID changed the makeup of football for this season. Yes.
Okay, well, we'll talk. We'll come back after we talk to Kenneth real quick, and we'll talk about how COVID has affected fantasy football. So we know it affected regular football, but fantasy. Kenneth, how you doing tonight?
Hey, pretty good.
Hey, Kenneth.
I had a pretty good season. I ended up winning 10 of the 13 games that I've played. Ended up finishing third in my league.
Well, that's not bad at all. That's pretty good. Were you in the money? Is it a money league?
No, it's not a money league.
It's just for bragging rights?
Yeah. But finishing third in my league's not that bad.
No, not at all. Not at all. We do appreciate the fact that you called into the show every week. You were definitely our biggest fan this year. Would you say, who would you say are some of your biggest disappointments that you had? That maybe you drafted somebody that didn't work out?
Let's just say I can't really think of one right off the top of my head.
Problem.
All right, so I have a question for you, Kenneth.
One of my biggest surprises, I would say, would probably be Mike Davis.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not part of a draft. That's obviously going to be a waiver wire pickup. So I have a question for you, since you were an avid listener and caller, and we appreciate that. Was there something during the season that we did that made you say, "Oh, I'm going to pick that guy up," or "I'm going to make that decision," that helped you win a game? Do you recall?
I would have to say the suggestion of picking up Myles Gaskin, the running back from Miami.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. That's cool. That's great.
Look, my favorite part of my time calling y'all was when I made that comment regarding 2020.
Well, which one?
What was the comment?
I said 2020. What's with the bald head?
Yeah, too bad he's not. He won't be coming on until about 8:30. But that's hilarious. I forgot about that. But
I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to offer my services for whenever y'all do like a mock draft for next season.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'd like to offer my services.
All right, we would look. We're gonna get a lot of our listeners to join us on our mock draft coming up next September, or the coming September. But we really appreciate it, and we'll absolutely let you know and keep track of us through our Facebook page, and we will update everybody and let you know what's going on. And we're going to start our shows again over the summer, and we'll go from there. But again,
we give you 100% permission to go ahead and give 2020 as much, give them a hard time as much as you want. It's open season.
I bet he's probably gonna freak when he hears that.
Yeah, he's a good sport though. But
he's used to it.
We really appreciate all your input this year, and we're looking forward to talking to you over the summer. And
if I may, I'd like to also offer my services to help you keep track of if there's anybody that's not going to be active or out for a certain game.
All right, we'll talk. We'll talk.
I'd like to offer my services on that.
Thank you, Kenneth. We really appreciate it.
All right, talk to y'all later.
Take care.
Thanks.
All right, and there goes Kenneth. All right, so if anybody else would like to call, talk about what happened this past season, 772-800-BUZZ. We were just starting to talk about how COVID affected fantasy football. Do you think that, there obviously weren't as many people put on COVID IR that we thought, but there were some Pittsburgh games that, remember, the game was postponed. It was taking place on a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
Yeah.
So it did affect some teams.
There was Pittsburgh. There was several games. And I'm trying to think of some of the other teams. I think
Cleveland at the end of the season.
Right. And this week coming up. Right. They don't have their head coach.
Right.
Going into this weekend. So yeah, it's certainly there was players on a weekly. Look at the Saints the other day. They didn't have running backs.
Right.
Right. There was. It seemed to be almost a weekly thing where there were some players out. Cleveland didn't they have to lose their wide receivers?
Yep.
Right. They lost all the wide receivers. The Pittsburgh. game got moved.
I mean, COVID did alter fantasy football. I mean, we're lucky that none of the games were canceled. Everything was postponed. I think the NFL did an amazing job of
somehow. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I loved having football just about every night of the week. Better than that. So.
Yes, there was certainly, I'm sure, some spouses out there who were like, "What is going on?" Yes, you're right, Kenneth. The Pittsburgh-Baltimore game, that was a big one because Baltimore, it was a few weeks there where they had a lot of people out.
Right.
Yeah, but think about just even a player that it had moved up or down in the draft. Going back to the draft, as we were talking about Kansas City, Clyde Edwards-Helaire all of a sudden moved from probably a third or fourth round pick maybe to the first round in a lot of drafts because Williams decided to sit out because of COVID.
Yep.
So it affected drafts. You're going back to every part of fantasy football that it affected.
Well, it's funny. Speaking of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we were going back, and one of the shows that we did earlier back in August or September, we had a segment called "Change My Mind," where we gave some really bold predictions. And one that I got really wrong was I thought Teddy Bridgewater would be a top 12 quarterback. I said he'll have more points than Carson Wentz and Matt Stafford. Maybe because Bridgewater was hurt throughout the season, or it's just his receivers were hurt. He just wasn't what everybody expected coming over, being the starting quarterback for Carolina. But that was one I got wrong. But one I got close to being right, and I'll argue this to my death. I said Antonio Gibson will have more fantasy points than any other rookie running back.
Very close.
Laughed at me, but the point is, or the truth is, Jonathan Taylor and James Robinson both ended up with more points than Gibson, but Gibson was out 3 games. So I would like to say that had Gibson not been out those 3 games,
Taylor was also out.
Taylor was out 1 game. Robinson was out 2 games.
It seems like it was more.
No, I looked back on this one.
Yeah.
It was a question coming in whether or not, because they had Adrian Peterson, they had J.D. McKissick, Bryce Love, Peyton Barber, and it was like, well, who's going to start? Remember, it was nobody knew for the football team who was going to be, but we knew that the human joystick Antonio Gibson was going to get some playing time.
So you just brought up, so as you're bringing that up, I'm going to bring up a question now.
Okay.
Do you know? All right. So the top 3 running backs that finished this year with yards, the top 3 yards getters. So now, number 1's obvious.
Number 1 is going to be Derrick Henry.
Right. That's obvious. Right. This number 2 is pretty obvious.
Dalvin Cook.
Correct.
And 3. What about Aaron Jones?
That is not correct. Aaron Jones was number 4.
No idea.
Jonathan Taylor.
Okay.
There you go. Now, he had a huge last week,
right?
250 yards or something like this the last week. But it just didn't seem like he had those games where he would be the number 3, rusher for the year.
Yeah.
Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, you saw it. With Taylor, you just didn't really see it. But he was number 3, and Jones was 4th. And as we'll just finish this category out because I have a bunch of different categories. Number 5 is tied. This one was when I was even writing it down, it surprised me. David Montgomery.
Yeah, David Montgomery came on in the second half of the season.
The last 6 games, he was like a number 1 running back. It was unbelievable.
Yep.
Probably after a lot of people dropped him at some point through, in the first half of the season or just benched him. But he was actually tied for 5th with another rookie.
Oh, James Robinson.
James Robinson, exactly.
Okay, hold on 1 second. We got another call coming in. Hey, Kenneth.
Hey, I got a question for you that's probably going to stump you. I seen this either this morning or yesterday morning on Get Up. Who holds the record for most playoff home game victories?
playoff home game victors, I'd have to say New England.
Are you talking about player or team?
Team.
I'd have to say New England.
No.
It could be like Pittsburgh. Is it Pittsburgh? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, that's what he said.
Oh, Pittsburgh. Yeah. New England comes to mind at first, but then I was going with Pittsburgh. But yeah. Good question.
And as far as the top passers in the league, I had both number 1 and number 2 on my squad.
Well, then you should have won fantasy football. Who did you have? You had Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams?
I'm talking about QBs.
Oh, I thought you said.
Oh, got you. So you have Watson and Mahomes on your roster, is what you're saying?
Or Josh Allen?
Yep. I had Mahomes and Watson.
Very nice. But you can only start one unless you're in a 2 QB league, which I like. I think we should go to that next year. We'll bring that up for our league.
And, I have to say the most surprising player, I didn't have him on my squad, but the most surprising player, I'd have to say, was Buffalo's Josh Allen.
Yeah, we'll get to Josh Allen in a few minutes. We'll talk about him a little bit as one of the surprises.
But would y'all agree or disagree that he was would be classified as a surprise?
Absolutely.
Anyway, talk to y'all later.
All right.
Thanks, Kenna. So I'll tell you one of my players that I really thought was going to have a great year. Now, him losing his wide receiver early in the season and really didn't play for the whole year was Matthew Stafford. I thought, his numbers the year before, he was like a top 3 quarterback before he got hurt. He came back. Of course, he loses Galladay. Was kind of a mess in the backfield as far as running back. But I had him in the top 6 of quarterbacks this year, and he ended up number 17. Disappointing. Yes, I didn't draft him. But definitely, if you were looking for him to kind of have that big year, which he seemed like, so.
I thought he would. Two of the sleeper quarterbacks that I had were neither of which did anything, which was Drew Lock, and I know that he went out with COVID for a game or 2, and then Daniel Jones, who got hurt. But I expected really good seasons from both of those quarterbacks. Where I failed miserably was Josh Allen. And what I had said, and I have it in front of me, I said Allen had only 3,000 yards passing and 20 passing touchdowns last year. He didn't pass for over 266 yards at all last season in a single game. And he was very reliant on his rushing, which comes with an injury risk. His rushing is planned, so it's not reliable. And finally, he's awful at throwing the football. Now, nothing I just said was incorrect about last year.
100%.
Right? He ran all the time. I mean, I'm trying to think how many times he ran more than 2 or 3 times a game this year. And he was accurate. And 266 yards, he gets that with his eyes closed now.
He looks like the best quarterback in the league right now, except for Patrick Mahomes and maybe Rodgers to me.
Right.
He's right up there with them as we've watched his games because he's in the AFC East, which we follow more. He is on a different level right now.
Yeah.
Now adding Stephon Diggs, who I know you guys have given some flack about, but think about what he did this year. He changed the makeup of that team. He ends up first in total yards with over 1,535, right? 127 receptions, leads the league in both of those categories.
Yeah, and clean teeth.
Yes, I saw that on the sideline. That was so bizarre.
I had Stephon Diggs. There was one of the questions that we had at the beginning of the season, which is which star from last year will see a major regression. And on that list, I have 4 guys. 2 of them I was dead wrong about, and 2 of them I was sort of right about. Stephon Diggs, but again, that was related to Josh Allen, right? Second one was A.J. Brown. But A.J. Brown, he came on, and we talked about last year how it was about touchdowns.
Right.
And that Tennessee was going to be this run-first offense. And actually, he had a very good year. The other one was Galladay, but that was because of his injuries.
Right.
But then also Brashard Perryman. Everyone thought, here's some guy who's going to
make a big difference.
He scored 5 touchdowns in the final 4 games of 2019. Right. But no, it never panned out for him.
You bring up Diggs, and you had that regression. How about this? I got Diggs in the 6th round of our league.
Incredible.
Right? And he was like the 20, I think I counted, like the 23rd wide receiver or 26th wide receiver taken in our league.
All right.
He ended up.
2020 is here.
Hey,
what's going on, guys?
Look, he must have heard Kenneth and put a hat on.
Yeah, he does not like my hair, or lack of, apparently. I'll work on that for you in the offseason.
He got you instead of me. But
I'm going to work on that in the offseason.
So while we say hello to 2020, I just want to remind everybody you can give us a call at 772-800-BUZZ, or you can comment at Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Let us know who were some of the sleepers and busts that you thought coming into the season were going to work out or not work out, and how did they do? We also wanted to find out who your number 1 pick, or let's say top 3 picks for next year, are going to be in the draft. So give us a call or Facebook Live, YouTube Live. Keith, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. As I was texting you guys earlier today, I definitely have some fantasy post-mortem. I think as a lot of us do, it occupies our mind space, and it's been a great distraction from an otherwise pretty interesting and daunting year. But I'm good.
It's funny you say post-mortem, because in looking at the stats today, getting prepared for the show, it was the same type of feeling like in Lean on Me when the guy says, hey, do you want to go see a dead person? So going back into the league stats and looking at it, I'm like, man, I'm looking at a dead person here, because it's like there was a sad part of me, not just the fact that I lost bad in the championship game, but just the fact that it's over. And it was an everyday thing, going and checking my lineup and checking, updates. I'm playing fantasy basketball now, so it's fun. It gives me something else to do. But, on that front, on the leisure front.
It's not the same.
No, it's not. It's not the same. Let's just be honest. Every other fantasy sport out there is a fill-in until football starts. Can we just be honest? Golf, baseball, basketball, all of it. We all know that. Yeah. So I'm so curious. Did either of you get into your bust and sleepers yet?
We were kind of jumping around. We did talk about some of the. I had said that Josh Allen was going to be a bust.
We all did.
Yeah. But somebody else I also said that A.J. Brown would be a bust. I was wrong about that. And a guy that I was also tremendously wrong about was Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
And there were questions about him coming in the season. Even though he had a good year, a lot of it was based on touchdowns. And we thought there's no way he's going to get those touchdowns again this year. But what he got this year that he didn't get last year as much were yards.
Yes.
So,
other than the injuries, he had a nice year. And who were some of your sleepers that panned out? Or did you not get into that yet?
We didn't get into that yet, and I actually only had 1 or 1.5. And that was Justin Jefferson.
Oh, yeah.
He came on. He'll probably end up being, I don't know if he's going to be offensive rookie of the year. Depends if Herbert or, how that's going to pan.
Robinson, right.
He's just been incredible.
But he's on record-breaking year for a rookie. Record-breaking, yeah.
And I also talked about picking up Taysom Hill as a tight end.
What kind of an asshole would do something like that? And what about you, Cyclop, what were
No,
your? Did you go?
we've been jumping around. One of my busts was Stafford. I thought he was going to have a really good year. Of course, some of that is injury related with Galladay, so it kind of threw that team off and running backs. We haven't gotten much further than that as far as bust to the sleepers from what we were talking. We as we were talking, it wasn't just stuck on one format. We moved around a little bit, so we're talking about some players, even on our own teams, that we were able to steal. And like Diggs, like he was talking about, I ended up picking him up. We were talking about this just as you got on, in the 6th round.
That's crazy.
Of our draft. We can base it on our draft or where he was going. And I got him in the 6th round, and he ended up being. Now I traded him 3/4 or at some point in the season because I was reformatting my team. But he ends up number 1. He had over 1,500 yards receiving and 127 receptions. Now, clearly, that's nowhere near the 49 or something that Michael Thomas had the year before, whatever the number was. But still, 127 is pretty damn good.
Just
reception-wise.
It's funny you talk about him because in one of the leagues that I'm in, it's a keeper league, and I had been keeping Stephon Diggs for the last 2 years. You can keep a player for 3 years in the 6th round, and Dalvin Cook in the 4th, which is very nice. This year, I opted to not take Diggs as my 6th round pick, and I took A.J. Brown as my 16th. And arguably, you can still say, that's still pretty good. But knowing what we know, I think you take Diggs in the 6th because none of us believed in that passing game, right? None of us thought it was going to be prolific, like that Josh Allen was just going to take such a leap. And, the question is, how much of that leap was Josh Allen and how much of it was just having Diggs there? I think it's a healthy combination of both. But I got to tell you something. Kansas City needs to look out because Buffalo looks good, really good. And, Diggs was just unbelievable this year.
So sometimes it could be a combination of more than one thing, right? With Josh Allen, you get a guy like Diggs who can go and make plays. He doesn't have to be a perfect pass. And all of a sudden, the quarterback starts to get more confident. Right? He already had his legs. He already had his running game. So he knew he can kind of fall back on that. But he was able to push the ball maybe to places that he couldn't before. Right. And all of a sudden you get this confidence, and you just saw him kind of grow and grow. And it was unbelievable, the growth he had this year. And he had a little bit of a lull in the middle of the season. Yeah. But came right back out of it and was just on fire the last quarter of the season.
It really looks like the game slowed down for him, and he just became a phenomenal quarterback. And even with guys like Cole Beasley, he was clicking. Yeah, Allen just took that next step. He is a fantasy and NFL monster.
Yeah, I think we just stopped talking about Buffalo if it's all right. We had talked earlier in the season, before the season started. I raised the question, which rookie running back will have the best season? Before we talked about Gibson. So this was the week before I predicted the issue about Gibson having more points than any of them. But I have it written down here that, Keith, you said that Clyde Edwards-Helaire would have the best season as the rookie running back. You said Cam Akers, and I said Jonathan Taylor.
It had to be JT, right?
I meant for the last 3 games.
Yeah, right.
I also said that A.J. Dillon was going to be a sleeper this year, and that was because I was so down on Aaron Jones. And nobody knew at the time whether or not Jamal Williams was even going to be still on the team when the season started. So everyone thought it was A.J. Dillon was going to appear and take over. So I was definitely wrong about that. And it's funny, I talked about Ito Smith, too, being a sleeper. And I said, because Tevin Coleman's gone and Devontae Freeman is gone and Todd Gurley is old, so Smith is going to end up being the guy, which actually happened, but the last game or the last 2 games.
And still not really the guy.
Still correct. Still not really the guy.
All right. So Rob McFadden, I'm going to put this up, and I don't know exactly what he's referring to, but he said Herbert, Metcalf, and Waller.
So
Rob, could you clarify? Are you talking about sleepers? Are you talking about? Yeah, I'm just not exactly sure.
Yeah, because Metcalf and Waller definitely aren't sleepers. Those are two known quantities, but Herbert was pretty tremendous.
Yeah, I don't even think I had him on my. I think I might have had him on my do not draft list. And you have to remember that Tyrod Taylor was the starting quarterback when we were
That's right.
before the season started, and we were determining and I said stay away from the quarterbacks from the Chargers because you don't know who's going to start, and even if Herbert ends up starting, he's not going to be good enough to have fantasy numbers. And it's like, no matter what you do, the Corvus championship team, absolutely.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh, got you. Yeah,
very much so.
Very nice.
Yeah,
very nice. Yeah, Waller. Go ahead.
And he still was not the number one tight end. Like I find that completely mind-boggling. Not only was Waller not the number one tight end in fantasy, but he was a good 30 points behind Travis Kelce.
Yeah, Kelce was ridiculous.
So interesting. Yeah. So interestingly enough, okay. So first of all, Rob, I also had Waller. I drafted Waller right after Diggs. I drafted him in the 7th round, and he was, I think, only the 3rd tight end off the board, right? Kelce, Kittle, and then Waller, but it wasn't until the 7th round. How about this for receptions? Okay, we already talked about Stephon Diggs, 127. Then you have Hopkins, Adams, and Waller, number 4 overall in the entire league with the amount of receptions. Now we know a lot of leagues this year are half-point PPR, full-point PPR. That's huge. It's 107 receptions. Who's right after him? Travis Kelce with 105. So he was actually ahead of him there, and he was behind him on touchdown receptions, but not far. And receiving yards, Kelce was above him. But, yeah, it's amazing that you had 2 tight ends in the top 5 for receiving yards this year.
That is pretty wild.
Or excuse me, receptions.
Well, there was
a bad year too for tight ends. It was a terrible year for tight ends. We've talked about the fact that the tight ends normally you have 10, right? Or you at least have 5 that are top. But you didn't have that this year.
No. There's a lot of streaming going on. It was a really weird year. So
Commish, you actually, for what I see here, you had Herbert as draft in the 10 to 12th round.
Okay, all right. So I didn't have him as a do not draft, but
you didn't have a do not draft, but you had him in the 10th to 12th round.
Right, he's one of these players that you hope, like what people did with Mahomes. You just never know.
Right.
Now, it worked out for a lot of people. I just before we leave tight ends for a second. The top tight end was Kelce, 261 points, and Waller, 232. Mm-hmm. The drop-off after that was
60
crazy.
points or something, right?
Onion was next with 150.
Wow.
80 points lower. So,
and a lot of that was one game.
Yeah, exactly.
It was mostly touchdowns. Tonyan actually was 5th in the league in touchdown catches.
Yeah. He disappeared after that 3 touchdown game for like 5-6 weeks and came back again. But yeah, the drop off is insane.
Then Andrews, right? And then Logan Thomas, and then Mike Gesicki. You could have never predicted that top 10. I don't care who you are.
Well, Kittle got hurt, so he wasn't in there.
Kittle got hurt.
Zach Ertz got
hurt.
Guy Hooper left the Atlanta Dome and went over to Cleveland, and he got lost in that shuffle. Jared Cook disappeared. Tyler Higbee, the bane of my existence.
Right.
He doing nothing.
It's surprising with how good Herbert was and so good at hitting different receivers and going through his reads that Hunter Henry didn't have a better year. That was a little surprising, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So, Commish, you were so high on Higbee that you actually named your team.
I did name my team after Higbee, and then I dropped him probably in the 6th or 7th week.
But he never got picked up, actually, I don't think.
he might have been a flyer once or twice for some people.
Yeah.
But no, it was terrible. I mean, I ended the season with Logan Thomas. So, I mean, my issue wasn't who I had in my championship game. It was who I played against. And sometimes you got to give respect where it's due. And Dan, who played me, every single one of his players had amazing days, and that's the dream when it's your championship week. So, nothing. The good news about losing that though to somebody like that is I can look back and say I don't care who I would have replaced. I don't care who I would have picked up. It wouldn't have made a difference at that
point. As it turns out, if I ended up making the the finals against you in that league, it would have been a very close game. I think as I had my roster set, I would have lost by a couple of points, but going into the finals, I may have made some adjustments, due to being in the finals rather than the third and fourth game, which I kind of left it alone.
And if your grandmother had balls, she'd be your grandfather.
She'd be your grandfather, exactly. Actually, I think his grandmother did have balls, but that's interesting. So, I wanted to bring up something that was interesting with a couple of my busts, and I find it very. What was that?
No.
We'll leave that alone. And I think this is interesting when you're going, for next year and future drafting, how statistics can very often be very misleading when you're looking at a full year statistics versus each game. So one of my busts this year is Matt Ryan. I think you would say he was a bust, right, this year?
Yeah, compared to what people thought he would be.
Right. Now, you know what's interesting? Last year, Ryan wasn't a bust. You want to hear what's so interesting? Ryan had more yards, one more touchdown, and more fantasy points this year than last year. But here's what's so interesting. And this is going and looking at next year at people's numbers when you're drafting doesn't tell the story. And I'll show you what I'm talking about, because if you ask me, I also have Josh Jacobs based on where he's being drafted as a bust, and it's about the numbers, and I will tell you what I am talking about. So Matt Ryan last year had 4,500 yards and 26 touchdowns. Did we get knocked off?
No, he'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So in 2019, Matt Ryan had 4,500 yards and 26 touchdowns and 319 points.
Okay.
In 2020, 4,400 yards, and I have this backwards, excuse me. He had almost the same yards, off by 100, almost one more touchdown and more points this year than last year. And last year he was good. But here's the thing. Just like Josh Jacobs, he had a few games with monster numbers that overinflated his numbers, because he had either 0 or 1 touchdowns in 8 games. He was below 20 points in 6 games and under 15 points in another. 0 to 1 touchdowns, and he had 0 to 1 touchdowns and below 20 points in 8 games, and in 6 games he had under 15 points. Those kind of numbers lose you weeks. So even though it looks like 4,500 and 26 touchdowns is decent, when you go 6 weeks under 15 points, 8 weeks under 20 for a starting quarterback, that is not good. He had a few monster games that really inflated things. And that's what skews the numbers. Same thing with Josh Jacobs. So if you look at Jacobs, and this really isn't a good year. He only had 1,065 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns. Now, the touchdown sounds good, but you know something? He went 10 weeks without a touchdown.
Right.
So 10 out of 16 playing weeks. Right. Without a touchdown. So it's interesting. Matt Ryan, Jacobs, you can say, all right, well, he had 12 touchdowns, 1,065 yards, a couple 300 rushing, passing yards, not a bad season. But when you have a running back and you've got 10 weeks without a touchdown, and Matt Ryan, same thing, all those weeks under 20 and many weeks under 15 points, the overall stats look good. But when you break them down game by game, and you see, Jacobs had a week of 3 touchdowns, a couple twos. Matt Ryan had those 4 touchdown weeks. It's an interesting story. As I'm just giving you draft. It's like draft strategy.
Yeah,
going into the next year.
That's where you separate, right? The people who just look at the final numbers, they look at from the people who are going to go back and look at the game logs, look at how much each week when determining your projections. But I agree. I think those are 2 great examples, and anomalies, I would even call them. For what's going on in fantasy, and you can't just look at an average per week and assume that's what this person is going to do.
Right. Exactly.
The consistency every week is so big. Would you rather you don't want one week to have 40 and another week to have 10. You still average your 25, but you'd rather get the 25 each week to so you're not getting beat. It makes a big difference.
It's so interesting to go through that exercise. Matt Ryan, most people, he was dropped in many leagues for several weeks and then started coming back again. He was definitely a bust, but you look at his numbers, better than last year. It was a very interesting exercise to do. So I had Ryan and Jacobs as two of my busts, and 2 of my sleepers this year, like you, Seth. I liked Antonio Gibson. I picked him up in a draft, and as well, of course, as James Robinson. Both put up really nice numbers.
Before we talk about the next draft, which I want to get into for 2021, I want to talk about Aaron Rodgers for a second, because if you remember, people were so down on him, and he wasn't even being drafted until the end of most drafts. There were some leagues that we found out when we were doing the show that he was available on the waivers after the first week. And yet there's the potential that he's going to be the NFL MVP this year. What happened? What's going on? Or was it the resurgence of Aaron Jones? Was it just the connection with Devontae Adams just insane?
So he was credit to LaFleur as well. Let me tell you, just in our league, he was it looks like on a quick count, he was the number 15th quarterback taken in our league. That's people's backups.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Right? That's unbelievable. Right? And we all kind of weren't sure what he was going to do this year, right? They didn't really have that big second receiver. Tight end was kind of a question mark. They just didn't know. But as you're talking about it, I'll go to some of the stats that I've written down. Number 1 touchdown producer as a quarterback for throwing in the NFL this year, Aaron Rodgers. 48 touchdown passes, 8 more than the next guy, who happens to be older than him, in Tom Brady.
Tom Brady, and it's funny you bring up Tom Brady, but that was a question that we had asked ourselves, and we asked everybody else, which is which player with a new team will have the best season. And we talked about Rivers, we talked about Brady, obviously, and I think our consensus was Brady, and I think that we were right on that. I believe that out of all the players that maybe Diggs, but out of all the players that went to a new team who had the best year, it's got to be between Brady and Diggs.
Absolutely. Although Phillip Rivers did admirably well and got the Colts into the playoffs, and they looked good under him, and he grew into that offense and started putting up numbers. But there's no question what Brady did in Tampa was incredible.
So before the season, one of the things we did, even preseason, we were going through and doing projections, as people are going into their drafts and whatnot. And my projection for Rodgers was 3,800 yards, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He ends up with 4,299, 48, and 5 interceptions.
That's insane. That's crazy.
And 3 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. Yeah.
And that's with Adams banged up a little bit, missed a couple games. And I think that Adams was hurt a bit last year. Wasn't that a big part of the issue? Wasn't Adams dealing with a nagging injury? Yeah. And I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So, that guy just will not go away. And somehow he will fall in drafts next year too, right? You just think there's going to be this
Aaron Rodgers? You think Aaron?
Yeah.
I don't see him. I don't see him falling
next year, maybe, but he did this year.
He did this year.
Still Aaron Rodgers, but yeah.
All right, so let's do this. Let's talk about next year's draft. I want to talk about the top 3 picks in next year's draft, and like the first thing that comes off the top of my mind is, if McCaffrey is healthy, there's no doubt he's still the number 1 pick. Do you guys agree? And then if you do agree, how do you determine his health at this point?
I don't know that I agree with you, man. Just because now he's got the health factor, and there's a couple other backs that have performed so unbelievably well that didn't have the health factor. Speaking, of course, Dal Cook, who a little banged up. And then Derrick Henry, that, I mean, Derrick Henry, 2,000 yards. I mean, it's just insane. I think with the number 1 pick, granted, he doesn't get the catches, but what he does on that team, I think I might have Henry and Cook over McCaffrey for 2021.
All right.
I think 2020 froze up. Kent, insert your comment now. So I look at that differently. I cannot. First of all, I think they rested McCaffrey. I think he was ready to go with about, after his couple weeks rest. There was no reason to bring him out, injure him, get him injured again. He already went through a couple of injuries. It's like, why bring him out and risk it? He's obviously the heart and soul of your team. He's still young. They weren't going to the playoffs. Why bother? Right? That's my take on that. Going into next year, he's going to have extra rest. But even when he came back for that 1 game, he was still the focus of that.
That health factor definitely scared me.
He is too important to that offense not to get 20 to 25 touches a game, whether it's catches or rushes. And he finds the end zone. He's too good not to take. Now, does Cook move into the number 2 spot for me, or excuse me, to the number 1 spot next year for me? Yeah, very possibly. But if you're talking about the top 3, I think it's Cook. I think it's McCaffrey. And as much as I want to, as much as you want to say Derrick Henry, he does, it would be hard pressed not to put him number 3.
Keep in mind, Derrick Henry obviously has the potential to get more than 40 points in a game, and he did it almost 4 times this season. Mm-hmm. But he also had 4 games under 10 points. Where Dalvin Cook did not. Dalvin Cook, I think, had 1 game under 10 points, and the rest of the season he was very steady. So not that Henry is boom or bust, because he's going to be boom. The question is, where do you draft him? Where do you, Henry, Cook, and
Kamara.
Kamara's up there too. Yeah.
Those 4 are going to be questionably your top 4. Oh, well, what about Barkley?
I was just going to say, it's crazy that Barkley and Zeke might not be in the top 4 with those guys that you just mentioned.
Right.
I mean, Barkley's tough to draft up there, right? Just because of his injury history.
That's true.
At this point, right? He's got a lot of injuries already. He's missed very big bulks of seasons.
Yeah.
And it just is his injury history. It's very hard to
even
put him up there.
You also can't discount how important offensive line is. I know you guys know that. Even before he got hurt, he looked terrible. Not him, but that running game looked terrible. Look at how good Zeke is and how bad that offensive line became and how poorly he performed. So, that's a big deal, how bad that team runs the ball and how behind they get in the games and have to throw. So I think you guys just outlined a perfect top 4 between Kamara, McCaffrey, Cook, and Henry. I would be looking at all those before Zeke and Barkley.
Does Jonathan Taylor move up into that top realm of players? Now, most people are going to think no, obviously, but when you start looking at it, depending on if Mac comes back and what else happens there, but Taylor looked good.
Yeah,
we'll also talk about at what point Do you stop the running back run and go with the wide receivers? Will Devontae Adams, will Tyreek Hill, will Stephon Diggs, will these guys be breaking into the first round? And I know Devontae was a first rounder, Tyreek Hill probably first or early second rounder. But at what point? And what about Michael Thomas coming back? There's going to be so many questions coming into the season, and a lot of it's going to have to do with health. But hopefully, if this COVID thing eventually, if people get vaccinated and wear masks and do what they're supposed to, we'll have preseason, we'll have mini camp, we'll have the ability for these players to be with their teams, to learn, to prepare. And I think that's what accounted for a lot of these injuries, was not having that time.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of so Rob a little while ago said Keenan Allen has the potential for being the #1 wide receiver next season. Keenan Allen had a really nice year. Didn't you have him, Commish?
Yeah, I had him, and not having him hurt me a lot those last 2 weeks. So,
yeah.
So yeah, he does have the potential. I think it would be hard to bypass Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. Keenan, I don't know. You have to look at receptions per game, but Keenan probably was in the one of the top 2 this year. I'm not really sure. I'd have to pull up the stats, but yeah, I mean, it was incredible how many targets this guy gets and will continue to get.
And guys like Justin Jefferson.
Right.
I mean, Justin Jefferson ends up with 1,400 yards this year. As you were talking, he might, he's got a chance at Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, we're going to see players like Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase and these rookies that are going to be coming into the draft this coming year. These guys are also going to be probably over 1,200-yard receivers in fantasy this coming year. Waddle, Smith, Chase. There's a lot of potential for those rookie wide receivers this year.
It's going to be a bottleneck of after that first tier wide receiver next year. Calvin Ridley.
Right. That happens with Julio Jones, right? Julio has never fallen out of the second round. I don't know, the past 10 years.
Right.
But you'll probably see that this year.
Yeah, he cannot stay healthy.
Yeah.
And now going into the season, Antonio Brown was not on the radar in Tampa Bay, and it looked like Chris Godwin was the lock as the #1 wide out there, and he definitely was a bust this year. So it's like what's that?
Agent. Chris Godwin is a
free agent. So I was just going to say,
Chris Godwin.
Yeah. Are they going to be able to? I would love to see him in Miami, or Allen Robinson. Robinson, who had a really nice year. Yep. But I don't. It'd be interesting to see if they can hold on to all 3 of those receivers. And to say they do, though, who do you draft there? I mean, Evans looked like the guy to have. He was getting the touchdowns, but that was just a bottleneck of a mess in that core.
Speaking of wide receivers, a pair of wide receivers that I think, with a quarterback and with both of them healthy and a healthy tight end, Ayuk and Deebo Samuel could be amazing.
Scary. Yeah.
If that's a healthy team, man.
This is all good news, guys, for us moving forward into next season, knowing that in the summer when we start up the podcast again, there's going to be a lot to talk about, and a lot of predictions and a lot of analysis that we're going to have to do to make these determinations and how we're going to rank these. It'll be interesting once we start that process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, so go ahead. I don't have anything else, but if you do, Brad or Keith, you can.
No, I did a little bit of an analysis on quarterbacks, and I know we've been talking about them, about what my predictions were. I gave you the one that 3,800 for Rodgers, and Stafford I actually had at 4,200, 26 and 11 going in. He ended up with 4,084, 26 and 10. So his predictions were really close. I thought he was going to kind of outplay them, but I put him there. So that was close. And Kyler Murray, I had him at 4,200, 25 and 12. Okay, with 4 rushing touchdowns. He ended up with 3,971, 26 and 12. So very close there. But he had 11 rushing touchdowns,
Right.
which propelled him into the top, 2 quarterback because of those extra 7 rushing touchdowns. Wilson outperformed what I had him for. He ended up with 40 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Cousins outperformed by a lot. As he had some really bad games, but he also had a lot of really good games. They were coming back a lot. He ended up with 4,200, 35, and 13. So that was nice. Tannehill, 3,620, 26 touchdowns. He ended up with 38, 19, 33 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And what moved him up to a top 10 quarterback was 7 additional rushing touchdowns. Yeah. So
isn't it amazing that you can have someone like Deshaun Watson, who's probably the top 3 in points this season in quarterbacks, and have a team that is the 3rd worst team in the NFL.
Right.
Yeah. That's wild.
We've got a call coming in. Hold on one second. It's a matter of finding the. Hey, Kenneth.
Hey, I got an interesting stat here for you. Y'all won't believe who was the top point scorer on QBs this year.
What do you mean stat?
Y'all won't believe who it is.
Are you talking about, what do you mean by stat? Which stat?
He's saying total fantasy points.
Who had the most points?
Probably Josh
as far
Allen.
as QBs?
Probably Josh Allen. We talked about that when I talked about how I had him as a bust, and they ended up being the number 1 quarterback.
Yep.
If I had an opportunity, I would have drafted him. I had a pretty good team, but I would have drafted him if I could have.
Yeah, he will be one of the top. He'll be one of the first quarterbacks taken in the draft this coming year, probably ahead of Mark.
Yep.
So it should be interesting. But thank you, Kenneth. We appreciate it.
So looking, this is another league I'm in. Josh Allen, number 1 quarterback by 19 over Kyler Murray, and 33 over Patrick Mahomes. He had 1 game under 20 points. That was the lull of his season. So weeks 6, 7, and 8, he had 20, 34, and 17. And week 12, he had 24. But it was unbelievable, his numbers. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. So almost more than half the season, over 40 points.
Wow.
In this one league, that I'm in, which plays out very similar. But yeah, that's more than half the season with over 40 points, and 1 with over 50, 2 with over 50.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah. So
again, he
pretty amazing.
Really surpassed expectations. Yeah. I mean, the passing touchdowns, that level, and the yards were not expected. It's crazy when you think about all the good quarterbacks that they've had in Buffalo. Well, I mean, prolific quarterbacks were Jim Kelly and Bledsoe had some good years there. You wouldn't think that this would have been the best season.
Why are we still talking about Buffalo?
Kenneth brought it up. I thought he was going to call in and talk about my haircut.
Anyway, there's still so much to talk about. I know, Commish, you got to go.
You can stay on if you want to keep talking.
Yeah.
I tell you, I have one more bust that I want to bring up. And it's interesting. His numbers, it's almost a flip of last year of the 2 receivers, and it's Cooper Kupp. I mean, he had some grabs. He had 92 receptions. He was shy of 1,000 yards. He had 974 yards, but he had 3 touchdowns. Where last year he had so many. I think he had 10 touchdowns last year, and it was Woods that had 2 or 3. But those don't sound like horrible numbers. But what's horrible is Cooper Kupp has had 1 touchdown in the last 12 games. And that is just not going to cut it. So it's going to be interesting to see where he falls next year. I don't know what happened with him and his chemistry with Goff, but it really fell off.
Not all the receivers there. I mean, it was very strange what happened with the Rams this year.
So Goff, interestingly enough, right up going over these stats, I had him at 4,300, 24, and 13. So not a huge year. He ended up with 39.52, so below 20, so below even a low expectation, and 13 interceptions. So he ended up the number 15 quarterback, right in the middle of the pack. And that going into the year with Cup and Woods and Higbee and Everett and all those weapons he had just did not pan out. Yeah, it seemed like it was better, but it wasn't.
Right.
Yeah, a very, very weird year for him. Couple of big games, but for the most part, not great.
No. So here's an interesting question. In Minnesota, is Justin Jefferson the 1A to Adam Thielen the 1B?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so as well. Yeah. Would be happy with either on my team, but yeah.
Cousins ends up the number 11 fantasy quarterback. He did have a week of 6 points and a week of 15 points. So he had a couple of bad weeks, which makes some of his other weeks, pretty nice. The last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 or 7 games, he was in that 30+ range. So he had a really nice end of the season. It's just sometimes you have a quarterback that he gets a 6, and you're like, I'm done with him, or that sticks in your head, right? So it seems like he didn't do as well. But, overall, if you look at the second half of the season, he had a really nice second half.
And it's amazing where so much of the offense flows through Dal Cook that there's room for him to have those kind of numbers. And that just speaks to how bad their defense is. And you almost don't want their defense to improve because you want to have that offensive explosion out of that team for fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah, great show.
Well, we appreciate it, and thank you guys for a great season. And maybe we'll do a show like once a month going into the as things start to progress, and there's the draft, and we can discuss when's the draft in April, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
we do a draft show. We can talk about the fantasy impact of the draft. Maybe talk after the draft, the week after the draft, and we'll go through and see whether or not any of the people take, and we'll have fantasy impact this coming year.
Right. And there'll be free agency and all those things coming up. So, what are we in? Beginning of January, football starts in September. Obviously, talking about it way before that. But everybody enjoy their off season. Take a little bit of downtime, not too much, and start getting ready for next year.
All right, and I want to thank all of our callers, all of the people. Ken, we appreciate that. Rob, all the people that throughout the season have asked questions, have joined the show, have listened up. We really appreciate it. Brad, Keith, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for being part of this, and looking forward to our next show.
Indeed.
Absolutely, been a fun, great season, guys. Really enjoyed doing the show. Looking forward to next season. Yes,
all right.
sir.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.